Okay, friends, we are learning Chassidus. We're learning Chassidus. Remember that Torah and Hashem are one. So when you learn Torah, you're becoming one with Hashem. We're learning the soul of Torah. The Chassidus is the inner dimension, the soul of Torah, which is the soul of God. When you experience Hashem, when you experience the light, then all the darkness vanishes. That's why it says about Torah. It says that if you toil in my Torah study, God says in the Torah, if you sweat in the study of Torah, I will give you peace in the land. That's what it says. The very last portion of the book of Vayikra, Leviticus, Parshas B'chukaisai, the opening words, if you sweat in the study of my Torah, I will grant you peace in the land. Because when you are able to connect, not with the external component of something, but with the essence of it, with the light that is at its core, with its truth, then you're neutralizing it. So today we're dealing with anti-Semitism. We're learning the discourse by the previous Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson. This discourse was delivered about 80 years ago, 1943, during the Holocaust. And he was in Brooklyn, New York, and he was trying to guide a generation that was broken. Thank you so much, Winston, for posting the link to our online viewers. He was dealing with a generation that was struggling with hope. Can you imagine during the Holocaust being a Jew in New York? I'm not sure exactly how much they knew, but you can assume that they knew a lot.
A Jew in Poland.
Right, but your brethren are being butchered. What are you going to do about it? Right? Never again today means that never again are we going to outsource our self-defense. And thank God Israel is unafraid and unintimidated. I was in a gas station yesterday. The other day. A guy comes over to me, tough guy. He says, God bless you and God bless your people and God bless Israel. I said, thank you very much. God bless you too. He says, you guys, you're the best. And you say, we're not intimidated. Good for you. You know? How's that, right? Americans respect strength. Americans abhor weakness. And today, never again means we're not subcontracting. We're not outsourcing self-defense. We're not relying on any other mercenary army. And we don't need anybody else's permission to be able to justify our bringing our men, women, and children home, are teaching our enemies a lesson that they'll never forget. And thank God the 2 more hostages were released yesterday. It seems like that the sustained pressure on the evil, cowardly terrorists is starting to take effect. But let's learn Chassidus without getting too emotional over here. We're on page 379 in the book over here called Chassidic Discourses. And we actually started this last week. It's based on a verse. This discourse is based on a verse in Bamidbar, in the book of Deuteronomy. It's the very end of the prophecies of Bilam. I'm sorry, remember Bilam? He was the prophet that was hired. He was the Jordanian Syrian prophet who was hired by the king of Jordan, Syria area in the days of Moses to curse the Jews. His prophecy was equivalent to Moses. So he was an extremely powerful prophet. And, the whole Torah portion called Balak in the Torah, which speaks about his attempted curses, which turned out to be the greatest blessings. Amongst his, at the very end of his tirade, he speaks about the end of days, about the coming of Mashiach. And he says that at the end of days, read this verse, Amalek is the first amongst nations in its hatred of Jews, and in the end he shall be destroyed. Amalek is the nemesis of the Jewish people. This nation is the one that attacked us first when we came out of Egypt after the conquest of Egypt and the 10 crushing plagues. This is when Amalek attacks us, and they're forever known as the nemesis of the Jewish people. He says all the nations, he says only Amalek in the end will be destroyed. Well, what about the other nations? So the previous Rebbe pointed out in our previous class, he said, look, the other nations will actually be turned around. The anti-Semites will turn.
Say that in Alena.
Which words? Remind me.
Second paragraph. I forget the words, but it's the second paragraph.
V'chol b'nei basar yikvu shmecha. All sons of flesh will call in your name.
Also, Amen.
Yeah, good, beautiful.
Yeah.
Okay, so he actually quotes a verse over here from Zephaniah, which says, "For when the righteous Redeemer comes, I will cause them all to speak a clear and plain language, so that they all call God's name and serve Him." Which means when Mashiach will come, all the other nations will be purified. The anti-Semites will become pro-Semites. How encouraging is that? But the nation of Amalek will be vanquished, will be destroyed. And the question we asked over here last week is, why is this anti-Semite different to all the other anti-Semites? Why is Amalek special that Amalek needs to be eradicated, whereas other anti-Semites will be transformed?
Is Amalek a metaphor now?
Who? Amalek?
Or is it a specific group
So
that we can identify? I'm
going to tell you where this is going right now. It's very important to know where we're going without getting lost along the journey. 2,800 years ago, there was a king who was the most vicious anti-Semite our people have ever faced. The most brutal, maybe not the most brutal, but the most efficient, the most successful anti-Semite, that's the word. The most successful anti-Semite we've ever faced is probably the worst anti-Semite you've never heard of. His name was Sanherib, king of Assyria. This is before the Romans destroyed our second temple, before the Babylonians destroyed our first temple. 2,800 years ago, Sanherib, king of Assyria, conquered the entire world. And what he did is that he would take nations and mix them up, move them around. He'd conquer Iraq and move them to Egypt. Then he'd conquer Egypt and move them to Greece. Conquer Greece, he'd move them over to Syria. And what happened was that this way there was no sense of patriotism and nationalism to quell rebellions. The end of the Assyrian Empire, well, they succeeded in conquering the 10 tribes of Israel and making them, to this very day, the 10 lost tribes. Till this day, there's 12 tribes of Israel, but 10 of them are lost. Right? 10 lost tribes of Israel. You can Google them. Who are we? We, the Jews, are the remnants of the last 2 remaining tribes, Benjamin and Judah, and a little bit of Levi. So when this Assyrian world conqueror came to Jerusalem, this was the end of Judaism. God forbid. If he would have conquered Jerusalem, that would have been done. Judaism would have been reverted to the dustbins of history. God forbid. But what happened was a miracle occurred that night. It was a Passover night, a Passover miracle, and the millions of soldiers around Jerusalem in the siege, they all fell in a mysterious plague, except for 5. One of the surviving soldiers was a man by the name of Nebuchadnezzar, who rose to build the Babylonian Empire and subsequently destroy the first temple in Jerusalem. So that's why, because of that story, we no longer work with biblical ethnicities. When the Torah says that a Moabite or an Ammonite male cannot convert to Judaism, it no longer actually applies because we don't know who the Moabites and Ammonites actually are. When it says that only a 3rd generation Egyptian can convert to Judaism, we don't know who are the authentic Egyptians. The people that live there are not really biblical Egyptians, right? Hence, when it comes to Amalek, we're not talking about an ethnicity. What we are talking about is a mindset. It's a mindset. Now, the difference between Amalek and the other anti-Semites, what we're going to explain over here is that other anti-Semites have rational reasons for hating the Jews. They hate the Jews because of the protocols of the elders of Zion, or because of the blood libel, or because of Israel's too strong, or you hear some people talking about how Jews have too much money, and the Jews, in order to be like the Jews, need to fail. Have you heard of this guy talking about it on YouTube? YouTube brings out the dumbest in people. It's amazing. Social media just brings out the absolute worst in people. Things that you would never say in public, but in front of a screen, nobody's looking, right? So, the various reasons why people, because of the IDF, because of settlements, as if there was never anti-Semitism before there was settlements, right? Various reasons that are logical, rational or attempts at rational reasoning, which are, promoting Jew hatred. Those anti-Semites will turn, because ultimately it's like that's going on right now. When you see the extent of the barbarism of Hamas, any person with an ounce of humanity within themselves, with an ounce of humanity, is moved to tears when they see what they did to innocent human beings. You know, the woman that was released yesterday, one of the women that was released yesterday, would make it her business to drive to Gaza every day with her husband. They'd pick up Gaza people and drive them to hospitals in Israel just to provide a free service for them. And she was, you know, one of the people that was beaten and abused and destroyed her family in this Gaza attack. When you realize that you're dealing here with, to call them animals is an insult to animals.
Insult to animals, yeah.
So they're like they're angels of death, right? And for people to stand up and support them in today's climate, for someone to stand up and say, you know, go Hamas,
That's Amalek.
that's Amalek. Exactly. That's a person that says, I don't care about facts. Facts make no difference to me. No difference. Right? So when someone like in the BBC gets up and he says, beheading babies, so bad. No, what's wrong with that? Right?
Israel brought it on
There's
themselves.
nothing you can do to explain that. There's no argument that you could present that's going to say, oh, I didn't think of that. You're talking about pure, stubborn evil. And that is my interpretation of this discourse of Amalek.
Even yesterday when I was seeing news, they're still explaining it. They're saying it's because Israel allowed Jews to go on the Temple Mount and they desecrated the Arab land.
Right, that's why. Now we found the reason. You know, you heard about the hospital in Gaza, right? You heard about the hospital in Gaza.
Yeah.
Did you hear about the hospital in Ashkelon? Did you hear about the hospital in Ashkelon that was bombed by Gaza? No, nobody heard about this one. The Barzilai hospital was bombed, right? We're worried about civilians being attacked by rockets? Really? We're worried about civilians being attacked by rockets. The UN is concerned that civilian populations are under rocket fire. Really? Where were you for the past 18 years when we gave them an independent Palestinian state and the only export we've ever received was rockets, right? And the world's most extensive subway system, right? Terror tunnels. This is irrational hatred. You know, we are passionate about human rights until the victim is a Jew, because our passion for anti-Semitism overrides our concern for human rights. This is Amalek. This is an irrational, unexplainable evil. It's just stubbornness because we refuse to see the facts, right? And that is what the Torah is telling us is going to be eradicated. So you know, the middle, the gray, the twilight zone people, you know, those are the ones that say, I can't tolerate to see what's going on in Israel right now. You know, you look at European governments, you look at, you know, the American government that's, you know, that's standing up and saying, you know, I'm a Zionist, I stand with Israel, right? This is normalcy. But then you have the press secretary of the United States president that was asked yesterday about how she feels about rising anti-Semitism, and she says, yeah, Muslims are being attacked unfairly. You know, where this comes from, you know, it's unreal, right? So where we're going with this discourse is saying, now this is going to be a deep dive now, is that we could look, we have a choice on how to view anti-Semitism. We could look at it on a superficial level and start naming and shaming. We can start naming and shaming that senator, this Democrat, this Republican, this newscaster, that journalist. We can make lists and lists and say these people are evil. But where this discourse is taking us is to the battleground that rages within yourself. That within yourself you have a Semite and an anti-Semite. The Semite is your godly soul. The anti-Semite is your natural soul. And they're at war. And if you want to know, if you want to bring Mashiach, if you want to let the Jews win over the anti-Semites, over Hamas, it starts right here. You know, it's easy to write a check. It's easy to write a check, to send an airplane to Israel. But you know what's hard? To beat this anti-Semite. Because every one of us is born with an inbuilt anti-Semite. And that's where this mimer is going. It's saying that like the previous Rebbe said, I wrote about it in my Friday email, that during the war, the Holocaust, you wake up in the morning, first thing you want to do is check the newspapers and see what's the latest on the war, but don't read the news. Realize that this war is a spiritual war. And when you know how you're conquering your anti-Semite within, that's how you're going to know what's going to go out in the rest of the world. Don't read the news, make the news. When you realize that the war is a spiritual one, it's then that you realize that there are different kinds of anti-Semites inside of me. Right? There's a Dave Chappelle inside of you too. Is that his name, Dave Chappelle?
Yeah.
Right? There's an anti-Semite. There's different kinds. There's anti-Semites that are rational anti-Semites. They're like, you know what? I don't go to shul because of the Holocaust. That's why I don't go to shul. And you look at a Jew like that and you say, I look at a Jew like that and I say this. I get you, man. I feel your pain. I do feel your pain. You've experienced deep trauma. Right? You've seen so much evil that it's hard for you to understand the nature of God. You need a little marriage counseling between you and God. I get it. I can understand that. I get it.
And you've come to the right place.
Yeah, exactly. Have a drink. But then you've got the other kind of anti-Semite within ourselves that says, I refuse to light Shabbos candles. In fact, I am running for mayor of Tel Aviv and I am opposed to laying tefillin in public places. What does it bother you to lay tefillin in public places? Like this is our problem right now? This is Israel's biggest problem, is that our children might actually embrace
What will the Goyim say?
the heritage of their ancestors. Is that the problem? Right? Yeah, that's the problem. Right? So when you have people, God forbid, that are marching in Tel Aviv, there's a public Yom Kippur service in Dizengoff Square or wherever it was, and they come in with beers and megaphones in order to disrupt the service. That's the anti-Semite within ourselves. Right? And that's the part of ourselves we've got to vanquish. Now, you can vanquish, you can nuke that anti-Semite within yourself. How do you nuke him? There's a part of you that is just stubborn, obstinate, opposed to God. How do you nuke him? You say, listen, I'm going to show you who's boss. You come in with superior air power, right? You send in a ground troops invasion, right, into your own heart. And you say, listen, Charlie, this is not happening anymore. There's a new sheriff in town. I'm committed. I'm laying tefillin. You know how many Jews in this community are laying tefillin right now? It's unbelievable. Yesterday, a guy walks in here, 95 years old. 95 years old. He walked in. He's almost 95. Came with his wife, laid tefillin, bought himself a pair of tefillin. I said to him, you got a good 25 years ahead of you, right? Bought himself a pair of tefillin while we were laying tefillin over here. We heard the news of the 2 hostages being released. I said, Rebbe Yid, come back tomorrow. Keep it up. Whatever you did the right thing. That was amazing, right? Women are lighting Shabbos candles like there's no tomorrow. And I want to encourage you to go to the website that we just put together, tefillinforisrael.com. Tefillinforisrael.com, where we're having a global platform of people laying tefillin from around the world. Yesterday, I think 4 Jews bought pairs of tefillin in our community. Was it 4 or 2? I can't. There's just so many Jews that are laying tefillin. It is spectacular. We're having a spiritual awakening. People that were like, I'm not laying tefillin, maybe 5 years ago, 5 days ago. But today they're like, no, they're having this, they're standing with truth. They're standing with Hashem. And you know what? I want to tell you right here, right now, I understand that you got problems with God, right? I also have problems with God. But that doesn't mean that we want to disinvite him from the theater of war. We need God on our side. We'll deal with the marriage issues later, right? The nuances. Right? The grievances. I have a special grievance meeting. We'll talk about all the grievances, right? But for right now, we need the world super gun on our side, right? That's God Almighty, right? So that's how this is going. Now, to introduce the discourse, the previous Rebbe tells us like this. He says that when it came to 2 weeks ago in the Torah portion, we read Parshas Reishis, and it says that when man was created, it's a very interesting word. It says, and God, the word created is vayitzer. Vav Yud Tzadik Reish, and he created. But it doesn't say with the creation of man, Vayitzer in the regular spelling. It says it with an extra Yud. Vav Yud Tzadik Reish. It's like a typo. It looks like a typo in the Torah. It's just misspelled. And he created, and God fashioned man. There's an extra Yud there. It's like writing my name, Dovid, like Doovid. You're like, who checked this? Right? That's what it's spelled in the Torah. It's a glaring addition of a letter. Chassidus explains there's nothing in the Torah that's by mistake. The Yud is a number. Every letter in the Hebrew alphabet is a number. The Yud is number 10. Right? There's 2 Yuds there, right? Vav Yud Tzadik Reish. Because when God formed man, he fashioned man. He made him with 2 tens. 2 T-E-N, 2 tens. What are 2 tens? You have 2 souls within yourself. How many parts is each soul made up of? 10 parts, right? There's the 10 components of the godly soul and the 10 components of the natural soul. What are they? Generally, we've learned in Tanya that there's emotions and there's intellect and there's emotions. Intellect and emotions. 3 parts of intellect, 7 parts of emotions in each soul. What are the 3 parts of intellect called? Thank you, Winston, for posting the link to tefillinforisrael.com. Absolutely. What are the 3 components of intellect called? Chabad. Chabad, Chachma, Bina, Das, idea, understanding, and realization, feeling, right? And we've learned about this. These are the 3 steps of intellectual assimilation. When it comes to emotions, there's 7 emotions that we're capable of experiencing: kindness, strictness, compassion, triumph, humility, connection, and communication. These are the 7 emotions. So make up 10. So the extra yud tells us that God created man with 2 tens. One soul of 10 parts, which is a godly soul, and another soul of 10 parts, which is the natural soul. Now you know that there's 2 parts to you. Oh, there's 2 me's. That's interesting. What's the difference between the 2 me's? Well, one is a godly soul, one is a natural soul. What's the difference? One is self-centered, the natural soul. One is God-centered. One is purpose-oriented. The other one is just hedonistic. Specifically, what we're going to get into right now, and I want to read a little bit about this, is that in the godly soul, the difference between a human being and an animal. What's the glaring difference in a human and an animal? Typically, an animal is horizontal and a human is vertical, typically, right? The vertical human has the brain above the heart. The animal has the brain and the heart pretty much on the same level. What would happen if a cow would decide to reflect on the stars? Break its neck, right? What do you mean? I can't do that. I look at the grass. My head is like below my heart. His head is eating grass. The donkey, the horse, they're eating grass. The giraffe, they're down there at the bottom. Well, maybe the giraffe is a bad example. But most animals, the head is like a little lower than the heart. Why? Because in the animal, by no fault of their own, the emotions are primary. And the intellect serves the emotions. In the human, the intellect is primary. And the emotions express the intellect. Right? Now, this is going to have profound differences we're going to learn about in this discourse. For example, when it comes to money, there's 2 ways to look at money. One way to look at money is me, right? Self-pampering, right? Another way to look at money is, what can I do with money? So there's how money makes me feel, which is the emotional component of money. Well, I have peace of mind, serenity, luxury, pampering, right? Then there's the intellectual component of money, which is, what can I do with money? What is money? Well, money can win wars. Money can impose peace. Money can build centers of learning and education. Money can inspire. You see the difference? There's the godly soul and there's the animal soul. Same thing with women, same thing with everything in this world. You can look at everything from a superficial perspective or from a purpose perspective. What were we going to say?
Are you saying that the animal soul has also 10 components?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. They are mirror images, sure. The only difference being is that the intellect serves the animal soul. So it serves the emotions in the animal soul. Whereas in the human, in the godly soul, it's the intellect that controls the emotions. By the way, it's a beautiful story of one of the Chassidim of the Alter Rebbe. His name was Moshe Meisels. When the Alter Rebbe was very, very opposed to Napoleon, the conquest of Napoleon into Russia, I've spoken about this different times. The French were proposing religious freedom, emancipation for all. So it's freedom for the body, but death for the soul. Right? That's how the Alter Rebbe interpreted it. The Russians were breaking our bodies, but our souls were thriving. In the emancipation of France, the Alter Rebbe saw a tremendous spiritual threat. So the Alter Rebbe was very opposed to Napoleon. So what happened was he sent his chassid, Moshe Meisels, who was bilingual, trilingual. He sent him to infiltrate into the highest echelons of Napoleon's main head command. And he became an interpreter. He spoke Russian and French. So one day Napoleon was very, very suspicious. His plans were being thwarted by the Russians. So what he did was he marches into his headquarters. He goes over to Moshe Meisels, this Jew, puts his hand on his heart and he says, "You're a spy." How would you react? I think even if I wasn't a spy, my heart would be beating at high speed if somebody did that to me, right? But Moshe Meisels, who was a spy, his heart remains calm and he says, "No, I'm not. I'm loyal to you." Later on, the Chassidim asked him, how did you do that? And he explained this is the essence of Chabad Chassidus. The essence of Chabad Chassidus is to allow your mind to rule over your heart, your brain to rule over your emotions. So instead of me being reactive to the adrenaline and the emotions and the shock of the moment, I kept a calm composure throughout. Moach shalit al halev, which means the mind rules over the heart, right? So this is the godly soul mindset, as opposed to a hedonistic mindset, which is self-serving and how much wealth and stuff can I accrue, right? This is more of like an immature approach to life. Look at a child that becomes emotional all the time, whereas a mature person is more intellectual, right? So let's read this idea in the words of the Maimer. Bottom of page 379. This will be understood by drawing an analogy to man's inborn inclinations. We're moving from anti-Semitism in the world theater to the internal anti-Semite, right? The verse says, and God fashioned Vayitzer Adam. The word Vayitzer is written here with 2 yuds. Our sages say that this is not a spelling mistake. This means that man was created with 2 inclinations, the Yetzer Tov and the Yetzer Hara. I want to highly encourage you to use these 2 words in your lexicon. There's the Yetzer Tov, the good inclination, and the Yetzer Hara. So like we say to our kids, when the kid loses his temper, we say, is this Yetzer Tov or Yetzer Hara? Which Yetzer are we talking about over here? You got these 2 little voices, 2 little people inside of you. And we try to tell our kids, make sure you listen to the right one, right? The inclination for good and the inclination for evil. By the way, the word Vayitzer, creation, and he created, we said this, also means Yetzer, which means inclination. It's the same word in Hebrew, creation and inclination. The Yetzer Tov is known as the godly soul, while the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, is known as the animal soul. The difference between that and animal lies in the nature of and the relationship between their respective intellect and emotions. That's the difference between the evil inclination and the good inclination, is how they relate the intellect and emotions. Animals' emotions are instinctive, whereas man's emotions are a result of intellect. So the animals, you can't accuse a sloth of being lazy. You can't accuse a crocodile of being aggressive. And you can't accuse a goat of being stubborn. Because these are instinctive emotions. But when a human being is aggressive or lazy or stubborn, you can say to them, why are you behaving like this, like an animal? Because you should know better. The animal does not need to know better because it's an animal. What do you expect from him? But a human should know better. Why? Because your intellect should rule over your emotions. Inborn intellect, however, is found only in man. Animals too possess some measure of intelligence, but it's not inborn, it's merely acquired. What is the intellect of an animal? As the prophet Isaiah says, the ox knows his owner, and the donkey knows his master's feeding trough. I.e., an animal's intellect is merely learned, while man possesses intellect at birth. So what this means is, friends, is that you can train a dog to do tricks. You can train a lion to do tricks. You heard the new circus? Barnum and Bailey is back. You heard about it? But there's no animals. There's no animals. It's only human beings, right? So you could teach an elephant to jump on 1 foot and a lion to jump through a ring of fire. You could teach them, but that's all acquired intellect. There's nothing which is going to alter their decision making. There's no primacy of intellect. That's man and animal both possess intellect and emotion. The difference is that man's intellect is inborn and his emotions follow the intellect dictates. While animals have inborn emotions and their intellect is acquired. So let's just talk about this for a moment. So how do you feel about the IDF? So when you talk to a Gentile about the IDF, they might say, well, IDF is mean. You could say that, Israel is an apartheid state. Talk to these well-intentioned college students. Israel is an apartheid state. Didn't you know that? And then you say to them, 1 second, how many Jews how many Arabs live in Israel? Like 2 million, right? Okay. How many Jews live in Syria, Saudi Arabia? How many shuls are there in Lebanon? 0, 0, 0, 0, right? And you're like, when you talk about apartheid, you should be talking the other way around. And then a neutral person will be like, oh, I'm not talking about the Amalek anti-Semites, but a neutral person is like, you got a point there. That actually makes sense. That Israel has the head of the biggest bank is an Arab. The head in the army, you got Arabs. in the Supreme Court, you got Arabs. To call this an apartheid state doesn't make any sense. But there's no Jews, any positions of any power in any of these Arab countries. What does that tell you? And ethnic cleansing, right? Ethnic cleansing. So Jews are ethnically cleansing the Arabs. So how has the population of Arabs changed in Israel in the past 75 years? They started at 700,000. No, sorry, they started at 200,000. Now they're at 2 million. That doesn't sound like ethnic cleansing. But you look at the Jewish populations of the Arab countries, they started at 200,000 and now they're down to 0. Now, an intellectual person says, oh, okay. So now I change how I feel about Israel based on my understanding. An animal would never go through that process. You see what I'm saying? How the intellect controls the emotions. So the way that you feel depends on how you understand. Sorry, what were you going to say?
I was going to say, and look at how Palestinians were expelled from Jordan. Sabra and Shatila in Lebanon were basically Palestinians from Jordan being expelled. So Jordanians expel Palestinians.
You want to talk about that? So you say, oh, so Gaza, so we stole Gaza from the Palestinians, right? And the West Bank we stole also from the Palestinians? Right.
We
So
expel ourselves.
no, hang on. So who ruled Gaza and the West Bank from 1948 to 1967? Who ruled over these territories? Egypt ruled over Gaza, and Jordan, the country of Jordan, ruled over the West Bank. So why are these countries that are crying out for Israel's heartlessness in denying the Palestinians their state, why did they give it to them when they ruled over it? Why? Because they didn't exist. That's why. Because there's no such thing as Palestinians, right? Not until 1967, there was no such thing as a Palestinian people, right? And now you realize, oh, okay, intellectual arguments, they change how you feel about the conflict. That's a human approach. Gibbs says, anti-Semitism seems to stem from people blaming the Jews for what God ultimately wants, which is the ability of God's servants to serve God without hindrance. But that exposes godliness for what it is. That's a deep dive you got there, Gibb, about the root cause of anti-Semitism. I happen to agree with you that it is by divine design, and that God did initiate. The word Sinai, Mount Sinai, means hatred. The Talmud says.
Sinai. Because
God infused hatred in the world the moment Mount Sinai happened, because they hate us because we're chosen. They hate us because we're God's people. But that's like another deep dive. I'm not even going to go there today. Let's just keep focused on where we're going today, which is more of a relatable level, that if you want to beat the anti-Semite in Hamas or Hezbollah, then you need to beat the anti-Semite within. So let's go just a little bit further. And just to finish this topic, this is why Vayitzer is written with 2 yods. And he fashioned man. For man possesses 2 yitzrim, 2 inclinations. The Yetzer Tov, the good inclination, and the Yetzer Hara, which is the evil inclination, are both alluded to by the letter Yud, numerically equivalent to the number 10. The Yud is the number 10. For each soul is 3 intellectual and 7 emotional faculties. The godly soul is intellect, primarily. And the Yetzer Tov, the good inclination, is the intellect that illuminates. It refers to the emotions which emanate from the intellect of the godly soul. The animal soul is the intellect that illuminates the Yetzer Hara. So the animal soul is the intellect that serves the emotions of the evil inclination. 7 emotional attributes that stem from the intellect of the animal. So this, friends, is an introduction to the 2 parts within us. We have the Jew and we have the anti-Semite. We have the intellect and we have the emotion, right? We have the superficial, we have the purposeful. And when we get to know who the 2 inclinations are within us, it's then that we're able to identify the enemy and vanquish the enemy. But Amalek, brace yourself. These guys are just going nowhere. You're not moving the needle on an Amalek anti-Semite. I think the BBC, New York Times, CNN is just so toxic. I mean, in general, but right now, it's not going to help you. It's, people spread these videos of another hater from here, another hater from there, and this company is putting out Palestinian flags. You can't beat these people. You can't change them. So it's only going to make you more depressed and more miserable. I say, learn more Torah, do the right thing, kill the anti-Semite inside of yourself, and then the ones outside of yourself will deal with themselves. Any questions, folks? Any questions? Was